In an editorial for the Denver Post, Ken Salazar announced this week that he will not run for governor next year. His announcement triggered many others to discuss their intentions to run, including Representatives Ed Perlmutter and Jared Polis and former State Treasurer Cary Kennedy. Patty, the potential primaries are never as juicy as they are right now. If we would never be so lucky to see Perlmutter, Polis, and Kennedy all in a Democratic bloodbath as a primary. But when we do get to next year's Democratic primary for governor, who do you think of those names are still around?
Well, let's not forget Mike Johnston, who was smart enough to throw his hat in the ring first. I think we'll see at least 3 top-level Democrats probably doing it, because if you wait your turn, you may never become governor, which is kind of what happened with Ken Salazar, who had always wanted to be governor and just, I think, realized the time was gone. Interesting that he announced this in an essay in the Denver Post, which kind of shows what generation he belonged to. Other people would tweet it or have it on social media saying, this is my decision now. He used old-form journalism to do it. And he would have, I think, been a great governor, would have been a better governor maybe 10, 20 years ago, too. But he's done a life of public service and done a really great job for Colorado in most cases. We are going to have an embarrassment of riches going on. If Perlmutter, Polis, imagine those guys debating. Cary Kennedy will be interesting. What Mike Johnston brings to the table with education knowledge is going to be important. And then the Republicans, with George Brockler as a fair-haired boy, we're going to see many, many more people jump in before we're done.
Well, Amy, let's get into the Republican side of things. While Salazar had some questions, especially with his affiliation with Hillary Clinton, he was still going to be a very formidable challenger, whether as a Democratic primary or as a general election nominee from the Democratic side. Now that he's not going to be the nominee, Republicans might have a bigger chance. Do you think their chances have improved now that Salazar is officially out?
Well, God, never underestimate what any party can do to themselves. I mean, this is so far away, anything could happen. But, you know, I don't know that, that Salazar was the big challenge. I personally think Mike Johnston is he is somebody that is appealing across party lines. He is, he's got the look. He's got school choice advocate. So he appeals to that sort of swing voter. I think he would be a much more formidable candidate than Ken Salazar would have been. But what will be interesting is how it falls out with Republicans. You mentioned George Brockler. There's Walker Stapleton. People are also talking about, Cynthia Kaufman, who that will be. But this might be the first time in a long time where the Democrat primary is more of a bloodbath, as you said, and that the list of Democrats not running is the shorter list.
Eric, I think you had a pretty good insight with this a couple months ago when I had the assumption that Salazar was a shoo-in to run and probably the front runner. He's like, wait a second, maybe he's actually not necessarily the front runner, maybe not even going to run. So you had great prognostication skills on this one. As you look forward, you see Perlmutter, you see Polis, you see Kennedy. That's a lot of big names, including Mike Johnston, who's no slouch. There's still a couple more people in there that are trying to pull up some of the fundraising. Who sees that field and says, okay, I'm going to wait for a better time?
It was easier to prognosticate maybe that it wasn't a slam dunk than to tell you who it is going to be. These are going to be 2 wild primaries. Patty picked the number of 3 as 3 formidable candidates, ultimately getting to the starting gate. I think that number, if anything, is on the low side. It's certainly not on the high side. It could be more than 3. If you go through the convention process, you can only carve that pie so many ways, but the convention process is so archaic now, I assume many of these candidates will just petition onto the ballot. I think both parties are going to have wild, multi-candidate races. I agree with Amy that there's every chance the Democratic race could be as ugly, if not uglier, than the Republican race. They all will say the right things now about keeping it very civil, but when the race gets hot and ambitions are on the line, things tend to change. There's one name we're not talking about. I don't know if he'll get traction or not, but a businessman, philanthropist in town, Noel Ginsburg. We'll see if he gets traction, but I wouldn't write off that possibility that he could emerge as a real candidate, whether or not he emerges as the Democratic nominee. You have Victor Mitchell on the Republican side, self-funder. You have Kent Thiry. I'm not sure if he wants to run as a Republican Republican or as an independent, get a DaVita CEO, obvious self-funder here. Wild times. My surmise, Dominic, is that whoever wins the Democratic primary, a wild Democratic primary, will be the favorite for the election. Not a prohibitive favorite, but this is a state that leans slightly Democratic in a year that I think or prognosticate will lean heavily Democratic just based on who's in the White House in an off-year election. So both nominations are worth having. The Democratic nomination is particularly worth having. I can't tell you who's going to get there.
Susan, Democrats, at least lately, have been far better at avoiding really bloody primaries. I recalled with a producer earlier, it's a few years back, but it includes Ken Salazar, when the whole opening to run for Senate, it started with Mark Udall with the shortest Senate campaign with 2 days, and then nope, actually it's going to be Ken Salazar, and what could have been a bruising primary went away. I don't know if they'll have that ability this time, not only at the governor's race, but if Perlmutter jumps in, there's going to be a lot of Democrats looking for CD7, again, and what Eric talks about could be a potential good year for Democrats for Congress. And then if Polis jumps in, you have that same thing happening in Boulder. So as you look at what we can expect right now, what do you think?
I think what we can expect, at least among Democrats, is a real appetite for, I'm not sure I would call it a bloodbath, I would call it a healthy primary and a healthy conversation about where the party is headed. We can see in the primary, in the Democratic Party this week, they're still undecided, I think, about their second vice chair. I mean, these folks are having a lot of sort of consternation internally about who should be leading the party and should they come from the Hillary camp or the Bernie camp. It was interesting when Patty said about Brockler, you know, he's the fair-haired boy. You know, the fair-haired boy might work well in the Republican Party, but the Democratic Party isn't interested in a fair-haired boy this upcoming cycle. And, you know, your comment, Amy, about Johnston, I'm not sure that because Johnston has the look, that's going to really go over so well in Colorado, especially given that we were such a pro-Bernie state and Bernie was anything but a fair-haired boy. So I think what people want is a healthy, robust conversation about, you know, this sort of old school Democratic Leadership Council, Clintonite sort of third way Democratic politics and something a little bit more progressive. And I think they all see that that time is very ripe, like Eric said, because this year is going to be, well, 2018 is going to be toxic for Republicans.